let's give a few minutes attention now to Brother David Duncombe, and he's going to talk to us and illustrate to us, do your utmost and count the cost. Brother Duncombe.
Do you recall some of the startling comments that were made in the February the 1st, 1987 Watchtower about pioneering? It was stated that in Japan, 2 out of every 5 or 40% of the kingdom publishers are engaged in some type of full-time service. It reminded us that worldwide there was a 22% increase in pioneering in 1986. Really, it's marvelous to see Jehovah's people on a worldwide scale taking to heart Paul's counsel as found in 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, and verse 15. There those familiar words ring out, do your utmost to present yourself approved to God, a workman with nothing to be ashamed of, handling the word of truth aright. Do you recall that first paragraph in that Watchtower article? It said this, a few years ago, many of us thought that only those with special circumstances could pioneer, wrote a pioneer in Japan. Goes on to say, it seems we were wrong. We are learning that only those with special circumstances cannot pioneer. And wasn't that food for thought? In our circuit, we've seen wonderful growth. In fact, we've seen growth from about 6 years ago, where we had just 14 regular pioneers in our entire circuit, to a peak of around 200. Many with difficult circumstances have begun to pioneer. They've made room for it. They're very much to be commended for that. Some, though, have found that they were not able to continue in the pioneer work once they first engaged in it. Why? Because some obstacles came up. Things that were unexpected came up, and they were not able to find answers to them. Sickness, financial problems, perhaps discouragement over not being able to keep the schedule that they had for themselves. That's taken its toll on some. Now, some counted the cost before entering the pioneer work, but were unable to recount the cost as unexpected obstacles came up. Well, we ask, what might help? Let's look at Jesus' words. See if we can't find some help there in Luke, the 14th chapter. Please turn there with me to Luke, the 14th chapter. Look at verse 28. Jesus said there, for example, who of you that wants to build a tower does not first sit down and calculate the expense to see if he has enough to complete it? And then verse 33, thus you may be sure, none of you that does not say goodbye to all his belongings can be my disciple. Now, the December 1984 Kingdom Ministries said in an article entitled, Are Kingdom Interests First in Your Life? This is what that article said, and I quote, counting the cost means that a person must be prepared to say goodbye to his material belongings if they stand in the way of his service to God. Well, what might that mean for a pioneer? Well, some may have to lower their living level to remain in the full-time service. And some in full-time service might have to be ready to make additional adjustments again, and sometimes again and again, to stay in full-time service. For example, maybe that perfect job that you had that enabled you to begin pioneering is no more. You lost it. How might you react? Oh no, I'm going to have to quit pioneering and look for another job. What if sudden health problems came up? What might be your immediate reaction? Oh, I guess I'll have to quit pioneering. What if you find that you getting way behind in your time, what might the reaction be there? Could it be that you might start thinking, well, I might as well give up and quit? Or are you willing to recount the cost, rely on Jehovah, pray for direction, seek help from the elders in your congregation, and then do your utmost to remain in the full-time service? Well, we're going to talk to 3 regular pioneers now, and as we talk to them, please note 2 things especially. First, how it was that they counted the cost before beginning to regular pioneer, and then the second point, how close they came to quitting and stopping. What changed their mind and kept them in the full-time service? What helped? Let's look for those 2 points. Now, our first sister is Sister Cheryl Morrison, and Sister Morrison is a regular pioneer from the Ganesha Pomona congregation. She's been pioneering for about 8 years. And Sister Morrison, let me ask you, did you count the cost before beginning to pioneer?
Yes, I did, Brother Duncombe. I first heard about the Pioneer Ministry when I was attending the International Convention in San Francisco in 1978. I'd only been studying about 2 months at the time, but it sounded wonderful. And so I started praying about becoming a regular pioneer. At the time, I had a very well-paying full-time job, though. But my contract was due to expire the following June, so I made it a goal to start pioneering then. About that same time, my fleshly sister started living with me and sharing the expenses, so I was able to start saving quite a bit of money. In the meantime, I gave my supervisor notice that I would be leaving in June, and I was baptized. Well, about a month before I was due to leave, my supervisor approached me with an offer of a new position and a $3,000 raise. I was really surprised. But immediately I realized that Satan was just trying to stop me from becoming a full-time minister. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, if he would try that hard to stop me, then pioneering must be something that's very valuable. And so, yes, I did count the cost. I quit full-time work to begin pioneering in '79.
Well, that's fine. You seem like you gave that a lot of thought. But now let me ask, has everything just been smooth sailing since then, or have you maybe had to recount the cost a time or 2?
At least 3 times I've had to recount the cost. I started living with another regular pioneer to keep expenses as low as possible, and I stretched that money as far as I could, but after about 2 years it started running low, and that was the first time I had to recount the cost. I started looking for a part-time job, and for about 6 months I applied for various positions in my former field. But when I got down to about $11 and I still didn't have a job, I frankly was starting to get scared. So what I did, I remember going out in service that day and continuing to pray. I've been praying all along to Jehovah, but I meditated about the situation, and it dawned on me that Jehovah hadn't brought me as far as he had, given me the truth, let me start pioneering, just to let me starve. So there must be a reason for what was happening. And a few days after that, Sister called on the phone. She had heard from a sister in another congregation that there was a part-time opening in a nearby company. I went there, applied for the job, and got it just like that.
How many dollars did you have left by then?
$5.
$5. Well, Jehovah came through for you, didn't he?
He did.
Was that the only time you had to count the cost or recount the cost?
No, twice again. About a year after that, my father had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Now, since I was the only daughter in the family that didn't have children of my own, I decided to come to Southern California to help my parents. And I really had to recount the cost at that point, because what happened was that for the 6 months that my dad was in the hospital, I barely went out in service. So I got pretty far behind in my time. And what I thought about at that point was I knew I loved pioneering. So quitting was out of the question. So what I did was I sat down and I wrote out a new schedule to make up the lost time, and I kept to that schedule for 5 months, and I made my hour requirement for that year. Then the next problem that came up was in December of '85, my car died. It was pretty old, and it had given me a lot of trouble, but this time it was the end. So anyway, I started taking the bus. I used to walk for 20 minutes a day to the bus stop and ride the bus for 15 minutes to get to the meeting for service. And I was working part-time to save up money for a new car. But what happened was that my employers kept wanting me to work more and more and more hours. And so again, I had to recount the costs, and I had to cut back on my secular work to continue to pioneer.
Did you ever get the car?
I got the car.
Good. Has it been worth it for you, Sister Morrison, all this changing of your schedule and recounting the cost?
It's been more than worth it, Brother Duncombe. I think the first benefit I noticed when I first started was that I began to relax and enjoy the ministry. Before I started pioneering, I would go out only on the weekends. And to be honest with you, I was pretty tense most of the time. But then when I started going out every day, I found that I could relax, be myself, and relate to the householders. I think the next thing I noticed was that I felt closer to Jehovah. And I also felt closer to my brothers and sisters in the congregation. But I think the greatest joy has been to be used by Jehovah to help other people. Our Watchtower study a few weeks back mentioned those we could call our spiritual children. And Jehovah's given me 4 of these. And it's really hard to put into words how that feels. One of them is now a ministerial servant, and another one is a regular auxiliary pioneer. And it brings me more joy than I can really express to see them continue to serve Jehovah and to know that I was used by him to help them get the truth. So I guess summing it all up, I can say that my circumstances have changed several times, and I've had to recount the cost several times. But pioneering is a treasure that I would just never want to lose.
Thank you, Sister Morrison. Next, we'd like to talk to Sister Opal Desnet. She's a regular pioneer, too, from the West Congregation in Pomona. Sister Desnet, tell us now, did you have to count the cost before you started to regular pioneer?
I certainly did. Being a pioneer family was always a dream of mine, and being able to remain in the pioneer ranks. I knew that if my family and I were going to achieve this, we would have to totally rely on Jehovah God. In August of 1984, my son James Andrews entered the pioneer ranks after auxiliary pioneering for 2 years in his last years of high school, and he was just appointed a ministerial servant this month. In May of 1986, my daughter Michelle Andrews entered the pioneer ranks, and in September of 1986, my daughter Trina Andrews and we entered the pioneer ranks.
So that made 4 of you all together in one family in the pioneer work. Is
That's
that right?
right. Now, brother, I knew that in order for us to support ourselves in the pioneer ranks, we would have to contribute equally to the household expenses. Now, when I became a pioneer, I had a very good job. But what happened was 2 months later, I had to quit because of intolerable situations that were allowed to develop on the job. And the little money that I had saved was quickly dwindling.
How much money did you have left, Sister Desnet?
I had less than $11.
All right.
And all of our bills were due, and I wasn't going to be able to pay my share, so I continued to rely on Jehovah, and I answered an ad in the newspaper. In fact, I called on the phone, and I left a message on their phone recorder. But shortly thereafter, one of my health problems flared up, and I went into the hospital. And when I got out, I got an answer to that call. And the lady asked me to come for an interview. And when I went for the interview, we're doing our conversation. It came up that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and the lady got excited. She says, "Oh my goodness, my husband's had a Jehovah's Witness working in his office for 20 years. I have to go talk to him, and then I'll kind of get back to you." This all took place on a Friday. Then that Saturday she called me and said, "I want you to go by my husband's office, pick up the key to the house, move in, get yourself settled." Now, first of all, they never took an application on me. They never asked me for identification. And to top that all off, they paid me 2 weeks in advance. Now, who gets paid in advance for work that you don't even do unless Jehovah's directing the work?
I can't answer that question, Sister Desnet. Now, have you had to recount the cost in any other ways since you started regular pioneering?
Oh, I certainly have. Not only do my daughters regular pioneer, but they go to a trade school to be medical assistants so that they can continue to support themselves in the pioneer field. And because of this, I babysit my very active 21-month-old grandson. Now, normally this wouldn't prove to be a problem, but I have a few health problems. I'm a chronic asthmatic. I have a thyroid disease that requires a life-sustaining medication. I have high blood pressure. I suffer from extreme facial and back muscle spasms. I suffer from vertigo. I also have a chip disc in my lower back that has a blood mass around it and has always been inoperable. I also have a right cartilage in my right knee that was removed, and I need the same surgery on my left knee. So that kind of makes it a little difficult having to babysit my grandson, but because I've always relied on Jehovah, he has worked it out. So my grandson goes with me on my Bible studies, to the book study, to the service meeting, return visits, field service. He's my little pioneer partner, and I can also take care of the lady that I work for.
Sister Desna, you're very much exerting yourself in the ministry. We appreciate that. Now, has it been worth it with all your health problems and financial problems to really work hard at staying in the pioneer work?
Most definitely, yes. In fact, please let me share this experience with you. Before I went into the hospital, Sister Duncombe and I were working together in field service, and we came across this Cambodian girl who really showed a lot of interest and asked us to return that Monday. Well, like I said, before I could return, I went into the hospital. But the whole time I was there, I kept thinking about this young girl. So when I got out, my daughter Michelle and I returned, and we conducted a 2.5-hour Bible study with the father and the uncle. And the uncle asked us to return the following Sunday, which we did. And we conducted a 3.5-hour Bible study with 13 people, and all 13 wanted the Paradise book. And the oldest man in the group said he believed everything we told him, even though we were using an interpreter, and he just hopes he can live long enough to see Jehovah restore the earth back to a paradise.
Isn't that a tremendous experience? Desna, can you sum up for us your feelings about being able to be in the pioneer work?
The only way I can do that is by sharing the scripture with you at Psalms chapter 40, stanza 5. And it reads, "Many things you yourself have done, O Jehovah my God, even your wonderful works and your thoughts toward us. There is none to be compared to you. Were I inclined to tell and speak of them, they have become more numerous than I can recount."
Thank you, Sister Desna. Next, we're going to talk to Brother Alan Lavoisier. He's an elder from the San Dimas congregation. He's been pioneering for a couple of years, and let's hear a little bit about his story. Brother Lavoisier, did you count the cost before you started the regular pioneer?
Yes, I did. I found that I was working a job that took about 12 hours of my time, including travel time. And it was a good paying job and a lot of good benefits. But I was kind of frustrated because I wanted to spend more time in the ministry. So I prayed to Jehovah about it, and I felt that if I could just maybe start my own business, maybe I could auxiliary pioneer every other month or so. But I knew that was a trap, because I've heard many brothers say, well, yeah, I'm going to quit my job pretty soon, I'm going to start my own business and pioneer. But many of these brothers I found nearly fell out of the truth because they became slaves to their businesses. So I prayed to Jehovah fervently many times that I might not fall into the same trap. And so I talked it over with my wife. We discussed it. We realized we're going to have to take out our own insurance, pay our own taxes and all those things. I talked with my family. They agreed that they would support me in my decision. So Jehovah opened up all the doors. All I had to do was walk through, which I did. And the very first month I started my business, I had made a promise to Jehovah that I would auxiliary pioneer that same month, which I did. And I was doing real well there for a while, but then I really wasn't satisfied. I wanted to get into the regular pioneer work. So my wife just couldn't understand that. She says, well, after all, you've increased your time threefold as it is. Why aren't you happy? But in time, one day she came up and says, well, is there any way I can help you to get into the regular pioneer work? And I says, well, sure. I says, there's a lot of paperwork you could do for me. So I'm really happy to say that my wife, Jehovah used my wife to help me to get into the pioneer work. And so I'm able to be a regular pioneer at this point.
Well, Brother Lavoisier, it's probably just been smooth sailing for you ever since you got into the pioneer work. Not quite. No. Why don't you tell us about how you had to recount the cost?
Just as I suspected, the business started to make me a slave. And it happened very subtly because the business started going downhill. I started losing customers. And I felt impelled to support my family, although I was a full-time minister. So I started putting more time into it. I spent early mornings and late evenings. I took time from my field service to put into the business. And I was getting so frustrated because the business wasn't picking up. I was losing time in the field service. I got way behind. And I was very discouraged and depressed. But then I remembered the August 86 Kingdom insert, where the society suggested if pioneers are depressed or have problems, to go see the elders. So although I'm an elder myself, I felt impelled to to see the elders.
Did that work out good for you to go see the elders?
I'll tell you what, it's Jehovah's blessing. It might sound funny, but it was Jehovah's blessing. Those brothers were such a refreshment to me. They strengthened me. They encouraged me. They took a big load off my shoulders in the congregation so I could get readjusted in my thinking and my schedule. And I was happy to get back into the regular pioneer work. I never left it, but I sure did get awful close to quitting.
Well, has it been worth it then to continue on in the pioneer work?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you the evidence and you decide.
All right.
Since I've been pioneering, I was able to help an unbelieving husband reach the point of dedication and baptism. The very first month he was baptized, he quit his night job so he could attend meetings, and he auxiliary pioneered that month. Additionally, I helped another man to the point of dedication and baptism. He's been auxiliary pioneering many times. He's auxiliary pioneering this month. In fact, his wife is getting very close to studying the Bible. I also had the privilege of working with a young teenager who I studied the book of Revelation with. Just Wednesday, he told me he wanted to get baptized at the next assembly. I'm studying with a young couple. They also want to get baptized at the next assembly. And during the time I was pioneering, my youngest son and my youngest daughter were both baptized. They've joined me in the pioneer ranks. My two oldest daughters are pioneering. That makes 5 of us in our family that are pioneering. It makes me very happy. You ask me if it's worth it? Better believe it.
Thank you, Brother Levassi. Now, those are 3 happy pioneers, wouldn't you agree? They are really feeling the blessing from Jehovah. In fact, now Jehovah is speeding up the work. Now is the time for us to be doing our utmost as a workman with nothing to be ashamed of. Now is the time to count and recount the cost. May all of us put kingdom interest first in our lives and manifest an eagerness to declare the good news to all who will hear.